If y'all would help me welcome my friend that got me into leadership and broken chains, Mr. Aaron Dean.
There's your spot. What's up, CR?
How you doing?
How are you doing? It's like homecoming. Except there's a lot more of y'all. I guess the first time sharing in over a year, might as well just pack the house, right?
That's right, brother.
I appreciate y'all letting me come back to speak to y'all. I really do. This is absolutely amazing. I appreciate it. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, and then it is gone. These words rang out so loud through my ears as I was suddenly jolted out of la-la land and back into my cold reality. My fingers burned from the frigid ice that was building up on my knuckles. I tightened that death grip on the handlebars, hoping that the pressure would increase the blood flow into my fingers. I could only see about 10 feet in front of my motorcycle as we tried to descend the highest peak in the eastern United States before Nuck and I both froze to death. The wind was blowing so hard that it tried to push us off the cliff edge into the nothingness below. I looked back to check on my buddy. He was tucked down in his box, nose dripping, enjoying his ride. I had this feeling of impending doom around me, though, that thick fog. I felt like every time that I turned around, something major would happen that would change my whole trajectory. As I crept down the mountain, I heard my friend's words creep into my mind. Your life is disaster after miracle after disaster after miracle. As I focused on my problems, the fog was getting thicker the further down we traveled. Suddenly, I was staring down a 180-degree hairpin turn with an entry speed that was death-defying. I was on a new motorcycle that I did not know, on a mountain that I'd never been on before, and I thought, here's that next disaster. Luckily, instincts took over as the machine in my body naturally saved us again. When we made it down the mountain, the fog had cleared, but I had to shake off my nerves. I pulled over to clear my mind and to let Knucklehead run a little bit. When you're on the Blue Ridge Parkway, the weather can change in the matter of miles and even minutes. Now the sun was out, and it had warmed up 20 degrees from our nightmare 10 minutes before. I couldn't help but sit on the side of this road and really just think about my life. Up to this point in my story, I'd cheated death with 4 real close calls that I know of. I'd been through 3 marriages. I had way too many run-ins with law enforcement, including at one point facing 3 years in prison. I'd been addicted to most substances, which included a terrible 2-year run on fentanyl. I'd lost everything that I'd owned on more than one occasion, and that included an incident where all my business tools were stolen off of a job. That job was working on this very church. I was trying to navigate through those tough trials. I lost my best friend through a suicide. Yet here I sat, staring out into a vast wilderness of unexplored territory, only because of God's care and grace.
That's right.
After thinking about the grace that I didn't deserve, when this same church bought me and our workers almost every single stolen tool back for us, I thought of God's care when instead of overdosing and dying, He used me and my story to bring others to this very Celebrate Recovery who now have testimonies of their very own. God's grace when I've held friends' hands as they slipped on to the other side, instead of it being me inside that hospital bed. I thought of God's mercy when instead of going to prison, He used me in the court systems to just be available to love on my veterans and call them brothers. I sat and thought of God's love and grace through the last several years of learning to lean on Him instead of doing things my own way. That's when I started thinking about the rest of this passage in James. Look here, you who say, today or tomorrow we are going to a certain town and we'll stay there a year. We will do business there and we will make a profit. But how do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like that morning fog. It's here for a little while, then it's gone. What you ought to say is this: if the Lord wants us to, we will live and we will do this and that. Otherwise, you are boasting about your own pernicious plans, and all such boasting is evil. I used to take this verse out of context, not even realizing it. I heard a jailhouse preacher say, I'm heaven bound with the hammer down and I'm taking as many with me as possible. When I was a young Christian, I used to think that that was the ticket in the fire that I needed. The older I get, the more I realize it has absolutely nothing to do with me or my power. I can lead someone to Jesus, but He must do the work on them. The second that I go out thinking I'm going to save and change the world, I forget who already has. I am just a messenger telling my story of God's grace in my life. I've been in the middle of learning this life lesson lately. I had always thought that I would go out and change the world with my great words of wisdom that were God-given, right? Well, like my buddy Steve said, disaster after miracle after disaster after miracle. As I was going through my third divorce, it left my dog Knucklehead in a unique position. When I would ride my motorcycle, he would normally be at home with someone. My boys were growing up, and they moved out of the house. It left Knucklehead stuck at home by himself. I rode my dirt bike maybe 3 or 4 times without him, and he'd whine in the window before I contemplating even selling my motorcycles. Crazy, right? I literally really thought about selling them. One day I was getting packed, and I told him to hop on, and he literally jumped on the back of my motorcycle, and away we went. He took to riding motorcycles like duck on water. That was roughly 35,000 miles and almost 2 years ago. As our relationship grew, our friends wanted to see him riding on his motorcycle, so I just started filming. It seemed like everyone loved watching Knucklehead on his motorcycle just as much as his everyday, just doggy life. One day we were at a local thrift store and there was a blow-up kayak in the back. He ran and jumped in that kayak. I bought it for him, and the very same day we successfully navigated down the Carter River. Since then, he has kayaked several rivers, with the most intense being the Class 3 waterfall on the Nantahala River. Actual whitewater kayaking. Being a carpenter has had me on a lot of roofs, and that caused Knucklehead to learn to climb ladders. He even learned to climb down head first. I was just posting our everyday life when a video of him climbing ladders ended up gaining 60 million views. Right? This was right in the middle of a prolonged period of me thinking on giving up knuckleheaded adventures. Our largest fan base was on Facebook, yet the enemy got it. It had been hacked, and after paying lawyers and fighting Facebook with no luck, I was severely discouraged and almost gave up. But like James 4:15 says, if the Lord wants us to, we will live and we will do this and that. In the last year of restarting Knucklehead's Facebook, God has allowed a dog's love to speak into 28 million individual accounts. That alone was unfathomable, but that was on only one of our platforms. Since then, we've reached 28 million on TikTok, 26 million on Instagram, and another 4 million on YouTube. That doesn't include the news interviews, front page articles, and the internet news outlets. But here's the tricky part. 1 in 3 of our followers are outside of the United States. That means that God has expanded our reach well beyond our own borders. All of this happening while I was trying to give up. When I was up on that mountain thinking about all the responsibilities and weight that something this monumentous carries, I couldn't help but feel so small and helpless. That's when it hit me. That is exactly where I was supposed to be right then. Helpless. I always thought that verse about the morning fog was for me to be in a hurry and do as much as I can before I die. Take as many with me as I can, right? I'm only here for a moment. I have since learned that I need to live in this moment before it disappears. I cloud my moments with my past and what I think I'm supposed to be doing and driving towards in my future. I do it so much that I usually miss what is right in front of my face. Since that mountain ride, God has had me living in a daily bread holding pattern. It has been the craziest time in my life. I am a thinker and a doer, so I want to do things my way in my time, which is usually right now. I went from making a decent salary, a really nice house, loads of stuff, to now living in a camper with some tools and a bike and a trailer. The transition has been difficult, but I finally have a peace in my life that I have never experienced before. I take jobs all over the U.S., and that has allowed me to see places and meet people that I never would have been able to from the comfort of a cozy, warm home. About a year and a half ago, I had the idea of a book about Knucklehead and his adventures. I always enjoyed writing and bringing the imagination to life. I thought, what better way than with Knucklehead? I didn't have to think that hard about the storylines. Because he already does everything. Since then, our project has morphed into 50 books, with one being over each one of the United States that we adventure to. I know that 100% of this project has been covered in God's grace because of how everything has fallen into place by some huge key players that could have only been sent by God. We met Knucklehead's entertainment lawyer through Broken Chains, and she has since helped us with our books and helping my words make sense, including this. I am an ADHD writer with dyslexia and a little bit of country mixed in, if you can't figure that out. So she has a tough job. Our illustrator has recently moved from Oregon, and that was in God's time as well. And he had us all meet at the exact right time. That alone was divine appointment. I was then faced with the monumental task of finding the funding to pay for our first run of books. It was not cheap. As time grew closer to our projected release date, I kept praying that if this project was His will, then the funds would just be taken care of. Every avenue that I researched was a dead end. So I had to live in that God would take care of it, or it would flop. I struggled with it as best as my human mind would, but I failed, sometimes hourly. At that point in my journey, I was behind in all my bills. I didn't have any work lined up. I'd used the last of my monies to pay the illustrator for her drawings, and I was starting to question my motives again. I was questioning that if I just wanted some recognition. It's okay to question our motives at times, but I was in a huge mental and spiritual battle. I would wonder why those that were close to me, the ones that I really wanted to share my victories with, where they were at. I would think that maybe they saw something in me that I didn't. I am my own worst enemy, and my thoughts were seldom positive, especially in this time. Thankfully, when we are questioning, God is still working. It came down to the last week that I needed to have the money together in time for the book release, and I got a call from a friend out of the blue. He said that him and a buddy had the money together for our first print, and I just needed to come and pick it up. That was God working again.
That's right.
I just thought that if the books didn't get printed, then maybe it wasn't His will. But I received a clear answer that day in the sum of $6,500. That person wants to remain anonymous, but it was another friendship created in the ministry of Broken Chains. Even though we are going through the storms, God is setting up the chess pieces for a later takedown. I don't always see why moves are made. Some pieces are captured by the enemy. Some are even moved to the other side of the board out of our reach, but are still being used to win the same game. The problem is that the human in me doesn't want to be just a lowly pawn, or in my case, a chauffeur for a dog. I always want to be the rook or even the king himself. That's why today I delight in just being a pawn. I find peace when He sends just what I need right when I need it, just like David in the wilderness. Right after spending every penny to print our first book, I mean every penny, I had to have Knucklehead neutered. It was a normal procedure, but of course, our story isn't normal. Some sutures came loose inside of Knucklehead's abdomen, and he bled out internally. Luckily, the combat medic in me seen his health diminish fast, and I rushed him to the emergency vet on a Saturday. They would not even take him to the back unless I handed them $3,800 paid in full. We didn't have enough time to find another hospital. He was just bleeding out too fast. I remember sitting in the floor of that hospital with Nuck in my lap, not moving. I was about to hold my best friend as he bled out in my arms. I called my mom crying, and somehow she got the money together and rushed it down to us just in the nick of time. This was from a woman that doesn't have much at all, and our relationship has not been the best. It was yet another disaster that God turned into a miracle. When I started Knuckleheaded Adventures, I always said that it was about Knucklehead. While that is true, it has helped me always check myself. Fans try to take their picture with Knucklehead and they ask me to join in, but I always say it's not about me. While that is true, I say it as a simple reminder to myself. I still fail, but I am growing, and I think that's all that we can do. Knucklehead and I went into the woods around Christmas to get quiet and finish writing our second children's book in our series. When we go to write, I turn off all the outside world for the first day, and we usually just get filled with exploring the area. By the second day of quiet, I can wake up to prayer, and I can start writing. As I pulled my notebook out, it was a little different this time. I was reminded by the passage on the front of it, which states, "I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not disaster, to give you a future and a hope." Most of us know this verse, but the most important part comes next. Verses 12 through 14, it says, "In those days pray, I will listen. If you look for me wholeheartedly, you will find me. I will be found in you, says the Lord." A lot of times when we see this first verse on a pillow or that handbag, we think God will give us what we want, right? Problem-free, full of riches future. When we read the rest of the passage, we can see the whole picture. Jeremiah is saying that when we are taken captives by our enemies, be it the drugs, anger, food, pornography, or even just pride, that is when we need to pray harder. That is when we need to seek harder and look for God with our whole heart. That is when He will reveal Himself to us. If you seek, you will find Him. When we do, that is when the real life change happens. When He is then found in us, we find that peace that surpasses any drug or euphoric feeling that comes from food or in that co-worker who isn't your spouse. When we seek Him, everything changes. That's when our wants change. What we think we need to survive changes. Our circle of friends, and even sometimes our family, all changes. But it's called being born again. When we set our minds on heavenly things, it oozes out of us. It radiates outwards like rays of vitamin D from the sun, and those around us can't help but be infected by it. We don't know what our life will be like tomorrow. We are here on this globe, but for a moment in time, like the morning fog. What will you do with this moment? Will your plans for your future include what God has in store? Or will you be like me and continue to struggle by doing things our own way? I am by no means telling you to live on a whim and move forward without the knowledge and abilities that God has given us. What we do need to consider is this, that we should always make our plans with the awareness that they can only succeed if God allows them to. If He is the Lord and ruler of our life, then no matter what is going on around us, we know who will win the chess game. Thank you for letting me share.